For about as long as people have been around, we have always been curious. Looking into a little bit of Wikipedia and a couple journal articles, you can very easily come across how invested humans as a species were in the exploration of our fellow life forms. When you actually think about it, this seems very practical. Information, after all, is what built civilization, and access to more information has almost always led to better quality of life. The most famous cave painting story in the world is the Lascaux one, where two teenagers discovered a cave in the 1940s. These caves contained hundreds of depictions of animals dating back about 17,000 years. The oldest dated paintings from around the world go as far back as 45,000 years. When you look at all of these, you start to wonder if there is something about us that compels us to make these imitations. Why do we make art like this? Well, I'm much too underqualified to give you any sort of meaningful answer to that question, so we'll get to the topic at hand. As society developed into what we know today, art too, for whatever reason, evolved alongside it. In fact, we discovered how absolutely massive the world actually was, the more fascinated we became with what was out there. This meant that outside of the people who physically went to these places to observe these new species and animals and plants, there would be almost no people who actually got to see these new world animals. This is where technical art came in, and as you can guess, these took off to our curiosities. That being said, what about the animals that we cannot functionally see, even if we go to the ends of the earth? What about the animals that don't exist anymore? There is a lot of discourse between researchers and artists and descriptionists about what the T-Rex looked like. This is fascinating because over the span of about 20 years, this very recognizable dinosaur went from this to something like this. While this may seem like a huge thing now, it has always bothered me how we technically cannot reconstruct what some of these animals would have actually looked like. Beyond carefully studied speculation, there is not much that we can be certain about. This is probably evidently why we like to relive and fantasize about these far off creatures long lost to time. Even a whole genre of our entertainment industry is used expressly for this purpose, imagining and reimagining various scenarios in which these creatures may yet roam the world. These reconstructions of animals exist in a solid vacuum though. Because the animals are not around anymore, we only have these antiquated depictions of them to look and study. And even though imagining and imaging technology gets better with every iteration of an animal, it is interesting to see how many variations there truly are of these beings. The term imaginative depiction is commonly used phrase in this regard. This has led to a lot of fictitious depictions of various animals, sometimes attempting to reconstruct history and occasionally trying to dramatize it. A few interesting places we see this throughout history can be seen in descriptions of animals that we assume existed but often aren't able to justify biologically, like how nearly every major human culture has something akin to dragons described in their mythologies. These mythologies themselves have grown more interesting over time and led to avenues such as cryptozoology. C.M. Koseman's Cryptozoologicon is a brilliant example of a more modern take on this phenomenon. Even more broadly, horror of unknown knowledge content spaces such as the SCP Foundation have found ways to entangle various seemingly reconstructed and inspired creatures into their lore. This is all to say that it is fascinating as an exercise trying to map the evolution of our imagination of these creatures, of the monsters that we make. that may have existed and some who definitely didn't exist. But it is interesting to see how they are perceived. I guess we could say it's a kind of instinct that we humans have to see the world as vastly more interesting and mysterious, and concurrently, as that mystery is slowly unraveled, to seek bigger, bolder, more interesting ways to preserve our mysteries, our curiosity for a more interesting world. Well, whether it's real or not, I believe hardly matters.